discuss both the opportunities and problems posed by infrastructure in the ASEAN region. Dr. Pailan is CEO and President of PTT Company, the Thai national oil company involved in oil, gas, and petrochemicals. He received the Asia Talent Management Award from CNBC in 2011 and was named the Thailand Business Leader of the Year in 2013. Mr. Arkom is Deputy Minister of Transport in Thailand. He's also Deputy Secretary General of National and Economic and Social Development and Director of Mass Rapid Transit Authority of Thailand. Dr. Fraser Thompson is a Senior Fellow at the McKinsey Global Institute in Singapore. Previously was a consultant for the World Bank and lecturer at Oxford University. I'm afraid I've demoted Dr. Thompson, you are head of the McKinsey Global Institute in Asia. I've asked our speakers to limit their introductory remarks to about 5 minutes, and then we'll proceed with some questions and interchange among the panelists. Dr. Pailan, please start.
Yes, thank you, Professor Fraser. When we talk about ASEAN, I would like to remind everybody that there's about 193 days to go before we become one altogether in our space of the ASEAN Economic Forum. Our company PTT, we are in charge of the energy security for the nation. We also aim high that we are now changing ourselves into the ASEAN energy company in anticipation of this Asian Economic Forum. As we are preparing ourselves to embrace the change, we have been invest vigorously in all the 10 ASEAN countries. We are happy to say that now we have all our investment based in all the other 9 ASEAN countries. We invest heavily in Myanmar, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and other ASEAN countries that you can name it. As we're looking at the ASEAN, I always, to make things easier, separate the ASEAN into 2. The first part, we may call it Upper ASEAN, or I call it the Continental ASEAN. Consists of 5 ASEAN that is on the mainland, which are Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thai, and Myanmar. And the last 5 ASEAN countries on the southern part, somebody may call it Maritime ASEAN, consists of Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Brunei, Indonesia. The 2 ASEAN are distinct from a geographic viewpoint. As you can say that in the past, the most prosperous ASEAN are mostly on the south because those 4 or 5 countries command all the sea route between east and west. And actually, that has been the source of the growth for the ASEAN countries. But I think now is the time that the continental ASEAN will play roles in preparing the ASEAN forward. Is that the plan to connect the east and west on the continental side together. We are now preparing ourselves. I think Minister Arkom can elaborate later that we want to span the continental from east to west by linking from Da Nang to the Way. PTT is actually, we are investing big refinery projects in Vietnam. We call the Victory projects. That call for the construction of the first ever ASEAN refinery. That will be on the east side. And that we are now building a network of gas service stations along that highway from the east to the west. We have building about 60 service stations in Laos, 40 in Vietnam, or 40 in Cambodia, and then a couple of 20 or 30 in Myanmar. We have been investing heavily in Myanmar. PTT probably is the single largest investing company in Myanmar. We have been invest $3 billion in Myanmar. We have been purchasing gas from Myanmar for $32 billion over the last 15 years. So those are some of the commitment and the activities that we are doing and we will keep on doing into the future. Among our ASEAN peers, we have been talking about laying the solid infrastructure from the energy viewpoint. We are talking about the concept of having a joint ASEAN petroleum stockpile under the UPSA agreement, the ASEAN petroleum stockpile agreement. We are talking about joining all the electrical grid together called ASEAN grid, which will run the line from China, the southern China, into Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and further down south to Malaysia and Indonesia. We are also trying to expand the gas pipeline grid together. At the moment, Thailand is the centerpiece of the gas pipeline system. We are commanding about 4,000 kilometers long of the pipeline that joining the pipeline system from Myanmar to Malaysia. So our aspiration is to extend it down further south to Indonesia and Philippines. These are kind of the infrastructure that we are doing. But of course, having said so, it doesn't mean that we are already there, already for the AC. We still have lots of things to do to realize one single ASEAN. I think now the difficult part is to trying to join the maritime and the continental part of ASEAN together. And I hope that by doing so, the ASEAN will serve as the springboard to serve the 2.2 billion people market, which is India and China. You might notice that Myanmar is the only country in ASEAN that have the common border with these two big markets, India and China. So I think it's a very critical time for ASEAN to reap that benefit of being the manufacturing center for China and India, and then serving that two big countries. Probably I then can pass it on to Minister Alco.
Yes, thank you. It is very much related to my career as well. 50 years ago, when we're talking about the ASEAN, we're talking about only the free trade and the protectionism, which we learned from the economics textbook. And then after that, the ASEAN start to talk about the after free trade area. Then we talk about how we live together under the one umbrella, but not the same way as the European Union, because we could not go up to the very extreme integration case like in Europe. We start to talk about how we live together and becoming the one single market and one production base. Recently, I think it's about 10 years ago, we're talking about the integration within ASEAN. But when we look at when I'm talking about the ASEAN, it's very much related to my life, because I started working in the planning office there since 1979. And then 1992, we thought that, looking into the future, future means today. If you work in the big classroom, it doesn't work, because everybody has his own idea. But if you're working in the smaller group, then your work would be very much faster. So we forming this what we call the sub-regional economic cooperation. We start from at the same time, 1992, what we call the growth triangle. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. So 3 countries work together on how we live, how we develop our economy together. And the other group is the country located along the Mekong River. 6 countries altogether: Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and also southern China. So all 6 countries, when you look at the ASEAN right now 600 million, and the Mekong country is 350 million people. So we work with the 6 countries, and we foresaw at the time that in the future, meaning today, that all the countries who share the border should be able to travel across the border. So we start to draw the line crossing the country. At the beginning, we draw the line between the east and west. And after we call it the East-West Economic Corridor, running from the Myanmar, the western of Myanmar to Thailand, to Laos, to Vietnam, is one of the corridors. And the other corridor is North-South corridor, which is running from Bangkok to northern part of Thailand, to Myanmar, to Laos, and to China. So once after we draw the line, then what are we going to do? The first thing is how to connect this country by infrastructure. Construction of the road across the border is very important. No one believes that the people in this region can easily traveling across the country, which is happening now. There's a truck, there's a car from Singapore, driving from Singapore to Malaysia, to Thailand, to Laos, to Vietnam, and to China. So, with our effort in the past 20 years, then I think what we see right now will not be possible. So we start from the construction of the infrastructure. And again, I was involved in this project. And now, because we are committed to the ASEAN 2050, One ASEAN, what is my job? My job is to make people in this region to travel easily, happily, and conveniently, you see. So how to do that? Then Thailand as a strategic location for the ASEAN. We start from how to build introduce the new intercity rail link between the country. We have road already. We have road and bridges. In the past 20 years, we have only one bridge crossing the river. Right now, we have altogether four bridges crossing the river. But a road is not enough, because the second reason is the logistic cost is very high. Because in this country, in Thailand, 85% of the transportation is by road. How we bring the logistic cost down? Meaning is the shifting the road transportation to the rail mode. That's one of the reasons. Second reason is how we protect our environment. Changing the mode of transportation to more rail and more water transport, you can keep your environment clean. That's my job. Okay. So first, the introduction of the new rail system to Thailand, but we still keep our 100 years old rail line in Thailand. It's not an antique, but we have to keep it in the good condition. Our existing is one meter gauge, like in Malaysia, 1 meter gauge, but the Malaysia already changed to one standard gauge. So Thailand has to change too. At the same time, you keep the 1 meter gauge for the not very high cost of the transport, but you have to also introduce the new system in order to connect with this country in ASEAN. So intercity within the country and crossing the country with the new technology of the rail line, okay, rail system. Secondly, 20 years ago, Professor Steve, you came to Thailand, right? You couldn't see the BTS, the sky train and underground train, and you could not see so many things change in Bangkok. So we have to make the Bangkok more efficient. Traffic jam, I think the traffic jam is happening all over the world. But how we can have more efficient mass transit system in Bangkok? Altogether, we have 10 lines underground. Right now, only one line operated, and there will be two more lines will be operated by the end of this year. So, mass transit in Bangkok is another project that we are doing in Thailand. The third one is how we improve the air connectivity. Right now we have the new airport, Suvarnabhumi Airport, which can accommodate up to 45 million passengers per year. But the actual figure is 50. It's 50 and 55 some year. So this government, I mean, because I'm in charge of in transport ministry, we want to make use of the existing airport. Around Bangkok, we have altogether 3 airports. One is Wharton, and second is the Don Mueang, which is the old airport. And the third one, which is very near to Pattaya, 50 kilometers from Pattaya, is called the Uttarpal Airport. So we want to make use of all these 3 airports together. And you can increase the capacity of the airport around Bangkok from 50 million passengers per year to 100 within the next 5 years. So this is the air connectivity. And believe me, traveling in traveling in Thailand, we have the airports all over the country. If you want to go to the northeast, we have several airports, very well connected anyway. And number 4 is about the water transport. This is for our exportation of the goods, the importation of the goods. We have I think one of the most, it's not top 5, but it's top 20 anyway, because we are a small country. Our deep sea port in Lanchavan. This morning, the Prime Minister talking about the way in Myanmar. Our vision is how to connect between the 2 deep sea ports, one deep sea port in Myanmar and our deep sea port in Thailand. These 2, through what we call the Southern Economic Corridor, okay, between Myanmar and Thailand. And the last one is how we improve our highway. Our highway construction in Thailand is mainly to connect also to the neighboring country and with all ASEAN. Right now you can drive easily from one country to the other country. The Chinese car is coming from, from Kunming or from Nanning. They drive through the Laos border to Thailand and to Malaysia and to Singapore. And people from Singapore, they travel very easy to take their family or their friends traveling around this country. So this is the borderless ASEAN 2015.
Thank you very much. Dr. Thompson, the floor is yours.
And so on the topic of infrastructure, I think some of the important economic factors that are going in this region, I think are really important to understand about this infrastructure challenge. So if you look at the total amount of infrastructure spend that's going to be needed between now and 2030, it's $7 trillion. And that's across transport, water, roads, energy, but also residential and commercial real estate. So it's a big number, $7 trillion. It's roughly double the size of the German economy today, which is economic growth. But historically, this has been the most fundamental, important driver of economic growth across every country throughout history. And what's really interesting in Southeast Asia is that this region is at a really early stage of urbanisation. So even though we're here in one of the great metropolises, the majority of ASEAN is not like this, and only 30% of the population is living in cities today. If you compare that to Latin America, it's roughly 60-70%. In Europe, over 90%. So as this region starts to urbanise, and roughly 90 million people are going to move to cities by 2030, that's going to lead to a massive amount of demand for all these different types of infrastructure. And just to give you one example, when it comes to energy, this region is going to be adding the equivalent of Japan's current energy between now and 2030. It's just so worth reflecting that, just the size of the scope of demand that is coming online here at the moment. So there's going to be a massive need. And then the other thing I think is important to understand is that this region is actually starting from a bit of a deficit of infrastructure. Across most economies, you see that the efficient level of infrastructure is roughly 70% of GDP. So the stock is 70% of GDP or economic output of that economy. There are some exceptions like Japan, which overbuilt, bridges to nowhere and so forth, but the most efficient economies is 70%. Now, if you look here in Thailand, for example, it's only about 50% the current infrastructure stock of GDP. So it's a big gap just to fill there. And Thailand's not alone. It's even more of a stretch in Indonesia and other ASEAN countries. So you've got two really important factors: this urbanisation driving demand, and this need to make up for the current shortfall in infrastructure.
Thank you. Let me ask a question. And you spoke about trillions of dollars. I've heard this one, that's $60 billion a year. Where's the funding going to come from? Is it public? Is it private? Is it some combination of the two? I know it's difficult to speak for each of the ASEAN countries individually as much as collectively. Is private foreign investment allowed, for example, in Thailand in infrastructure and the other ASEAN countries? Are there public-private partnerships? So the question is where this enormous demand for capital, how it's going to be fulfilled. Minister Arkham, perhaps you can...
Well, I think it's infrastructure project, as you mentioned, that 50%. Actually, in Thailand, we're open. But we are not yet up to the mobilized 100% from the private sector. Our PPP law 2013 law allowed the private sector to participate in the public project. We relaxed some of the rules and regulations for the private sector to come in. But however, as I said, it's not so easy because we still our rules and regulations still stick to the concession system. We are not allowing the 100% to mobilize funding from the private capital market. We're talking about the infrastructure fund this morning within my ministry about how if we want to reduce not to be the burden for the public debt, so we have to divert all the investment fund to the private sector. Still, we still have some of the limitation in the rules and regulations. But in the future, the first project will be on the energy. I'm not sure which project, but from the electricity generation authority of Thailand will be allowing one greenfield project to mobilize them from the infrastructure fund. But in Thailand, yes, of course, there are so many cases in Thailand. For example, the mass transit system, because we have to look at the cost of investment is quite big actually. So at the moment, the civil cost, the civil work will be borne by the government, and the operation actually by the private sector.
Dr. Thompson, can you add to that? Regionally, you're familiar with most of the ASEAN countries. Is private investment allowed in infrastructure? Is it welcomed? Is private-public partnerships possible? FDI?
So there's also been quite significant pockets of finance that are starting to become available, particularly from China. So we've seen the creation of the New Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, and now the New Silk Road Fund. Now these are, when you add them all up, they don't come anywhere near the $7 trillion that's needed, but they are a start. So there is a real gap in the financing here still. And countries like the Philippines and various other ASEAN countries have been making important steps there. But I think sometimes we put undue focus on the financing of this. When we looked at the bottlenecks to infrastructure, most of the real bottlenecks were further upstream. So things like project selection, things like land acquisition, and things like just making the most of existing infrastructure. To give you one anecdote, in Jakarta, I won't use any Bangkok examples because it'll be too close to home, so I'll use Jakarta. I don't think, are there any Indonesians in the audience? Okay, well, apologies in advance. That roughly half of the water in Jakarta gets lost through leaking pipes, and roughly 10% of their energy gets lost through transmission. So sometimes we overlook the fact that just making the most of existing infrastructure is actually really, really important in this region.
Let me mention about the cost of fund, because our state-owned enterprises as well as the government sector, all the bigger projects, particularly the state-owned enterprise, they still enjoy the offer from the commercial bank or from the international bank, because the difference between the return to the owner, the infrastructure fund still 2%, 2 to 3% difference. So people still enjoy it. They have the good credit, like a power sector. I'm not sure the PTT, very low cost of fund. That's another reason why Thailand is not able to mobilize more funds on the
Do you want to add anything to that?
As for PTT, we are with our very solid, very vast capital base. We are financing all our own investment in energy infrastructure. Our investment plan for the next 5 years for the whole group is more than $1 trillion. And then we keep on with this tradition of making investment and on the behalf of the country and on behalf of the government. That's why that I expect that soon after the integration of the ASEAN into one single market, the system will expand rapidly. And I'm very optimistic side.
Let me follow that up with a question. We've been talking a lot about Thailand. There's vast differences in levels of development among the ASEAN countries, and vast differences in political systems, vast differences in legal systems. We heard this morning in Myanmar that there's real inhibitions to foreign investment because of a very unsure legal system. Will the differences among countries in ASEAN hinder infrastructure development, hinder the single market? It seems to me that you could have well-developed rail and road and water transport in Thailand, but unless you have the ability to have regional infrastructure developed, a single market is going to be very hard to achieve. I think the Prime Minister this morning mentioned that only 25% of ASEAN exports go to other countries within the region. And with a single market, you'd hope that would rise dramatically. So will the differences across countries be a barrier? Will that be a problem?
Professor Fraser, you're probably very right on that. There are great differences among the 10 ASEAN. We used to think that how about we separate into two groups, the moderate one and the lesser one. But we decided no, we will go all together at the same time as a group. Taking the case of energy, I think among 10 ASEAN countries, there are probably 3 or 4 countries that have the true energy security. When I mention energy security, I mean that the people have the right to source it as a light source of a light type of energy you want to consume, and there's a stability of supply. Probably Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Brunei. And the rest still have a problem in this infrastructure. We are talking about Indonesia, that probably 40% of the population still don't have access into the power system, not access to the grid. But I think if we still keep on with the tradition of having 10 different countries working on this zone, I think we will never be able to bring the 10 into one single level field, single level. By adjoining into one, and each country have the responsibility to have this peer up to the same level. I strongly believe that is the only accelerated way to get everything done at the same level. Take the case of the banks, take the case of the airlines. Once we announce that there will be ASEAN airlines leading by Air Asia, for example, you see that immediately the business model spread throughout the ASEAN, and then we suddenly within a few years we see a lot more of the low-cost airline that assume the same business model. Banks will probably be the same. And definitely we start to see that many ASEAN energy companies like PTT starting to work together, and we are just learning together. I think one of the good things of having becoming one single market is that we stop to thinking that our friend, our peers in other nations is our competitors, but rather we are partners that we need to working hand in hand together, and then we will promote, and then we will standardize all the infrastructure altogether at the accelerated level. That's at least our feeling and what we can feel from the market.
Let me ask you, Mr. Arkan, if I can, how standardized is infrastructure across the region? You mentioned rail before. Are rail lines compatible across Malaysia and Thailand and the other countries?
At this moment, I think yes, there's a train running from Kuala Lumpur to Bangkok using the 1 meter gauge. I think the rules and regulation of the cross-border facilities of the transport is not so much difficult. But we still need to negotiate about the standardization, particularly on the technical system. And if we change, because right now we have the agreement between Malaysia and Thailand, so train can run easily. But in the future, the system in China, and of course, if Laos and Thailand using the same technology, then it should not be difficult. Okay. But your point is I think the political system, difference in political system doesn't make any problems for the development in this region. The only problem is the rules and regulations in certain areas. Develop the infrastructure is much more easier than doing business. Doing business, you need the rules and regulations. For example, how much the items, the tariff item, that you have to reduce in order to be compatible. And you still need to think about whether your judgment from your custom officer in one country to the other country, whether they are the same or not. And also still you have the non-tariff barrier. Still standard and quality is one of the issues that we are discussing among the trade countries. But when I mentioned about the infrastructure, is much more easy because in this country we have to look at the level of economic development. Surrounding Thailand is much more poorer than Thailand. So we have the South-South cooperation. So always, if you want to help them to develop, sometimes it's not only the soft road, but we are giving grants, free grant for the road construction. So many projects that we're helping neighboring country. We are not waiting for the World Bank and the ADB to help this country. Once we agree, then we have. So it's easy to negotiate that they're doing business.
But I understand commercially. Doesn't the legal system, the regulatory system make a difference? People are not secure about access to land, access to property. Won't it be more difficult to raise capital for infrastructure projects?
Right now, it's not so difficult. I mean, because all neighboring countries learning from Thailand. So one of the infrastructure in the Laos, they raised the capital in Thailand, in our capital market. So in Thailand, maybe we are slower than some other countries.
Dr. Thompson, you look at Asia as a whole, and ASEAN as a whole. Do you see much in the way of intra-regional cooperation, so much in the way of conversations among governments, cooperative efforts to deal with some of the infrastructure problems?
There certainly has been real progress there. And we spoke already about the attempts to create an ASEAN power grid and the gas pipelines, which really will be significant. But I'm glad the Minister mentioned the softer issues, because I think some of those get overlooked when it comes to infrastructure. So we tend to focus on the bridges, the new investment, but a lot of the barriers that are stopping ASEAN today in the integration, and the fact it's only 25% of trade, are actually to do with these softer factors. So the reforms to customs areas that have significant impact, the non-tariff areas, so the fact that we have 4 different halal food standards in ASEAN, and none of those standards are the same as Saudi Arabia, is kind of bizarre. So there's a range of these softer things which don't require any real investment, but could have a really quite dramatic impact on integration in the region.
Can I say one example? I mean, the difference in political system doesn't bother economic development. Look at the difference between in Thailand, when we have the elected government, and as compared to the neighboring country. One example is very good one, is the cross-border transport agreement between 6 countries. We all 6 countries signed the agreement. And you have to ratify all annex and protocol in order to be able to implement the cross-border facilities. In our case, in the parliament, in order to ratify the annex protocol, we have to propose to issue another bill or a law. It takes almost 10 years because the economic law is not always on the agenda. But if you go to Vietnam, to Laos, as a socialist country, they quickly, within 1 year, they pass the law and they ratify. And the pending laws that we have to ratify last 10 years, always in the top, but always the other urgent agenda coming first. So when the Prime Minister General Prayut came to the power, and I could do it within 2 months, all 5 laws by myself. So you can see.
Dr. Palin, can you talk a little more about energy integration within ASEAN? Oil and gas, certainly. Electricity, for example. Are there cooperative efforts? Is there progress in that direction?
In any sector, we have a very close cooperation among all the 10 national energy companies. And the auspice of the ESCO, we call it ESCO. We have periodical meeting, we have plans, and we are working together. A good example is that as ASEAN has become more reliant on imported energies, so recently we are talking about having another new initiative called ASEAN LNG Cooperative, for example. That is a new issue that we discussed that more and more countries are starting to import LNG. So how ASEAN will become agile itself and becoming one single source of import, that we can have more negotiating power with the suppliers. These are one of the very good examples. And that I think there's still some areas in ASEAN that still need a lot of funding for the exploration of the energy. So without cooperating and doing together, we still, if we just let the international oil companies do a good job, I think we probably are not doing our job well. So these are the examples that we are discussing and always having dialogue. And I'm proud to say that now Petronas of Malaysia and PTT, we are one of the 2 largest energy companies in the world. We are both in top 100. And that we are leading our peers, national oil companies, along the path of becoming more and more energy independence, and that we have more and more negotiating power to ensure that the whole region fully self-sufficient, and then to ensure that we have the most reliable energy supply to our people, 600 million people. So this is going on almost on the daily basis.
Let me ask what may be an unfair question to each of you. Why should we be optimistic that there will be a single market by the end of this year? Let me start with you, Dr. Simon.
Well, actually, I'm really bullish about the ASEAN Economic Community. I think it's quite fashionable in the papers at the moment for people to sling mud at AEC. And just the other day, there was another report that came out, and one of the commentators said it's an illusion and so forth. And I think that's fundamentally not true. Yes, there's much to do, and are we going to see complete integration by December this year? No. But are we seeing important progress? Certainly. The fact that tariffs are near zero, the fact that we do have national single windows implemented in most countries, like, this is real progress that's happening on the ground. Now, I think that the challenge for ASEAN is how to build on that. So a lot of the obvious bottlenecks have been removed, but these things that we're talking about now, the non-tariff barriers, the high-skilled labour mobility, there's been very limited progress on that so far, and some of the investment restrictions. So if we can get more action on that, then I think there's huge opportunity in ASEAN. But already I think it's any company that doesn't think about ASEAN and have a lens of this ASEAN economic community, I think is really missing a trick.
Minister?
I'm quite optimistic because there's a case that the ASEAN can be one. And looking at the 1997, the financial crisis, then ASEAN was able to get together in the what we call the Chiang Mai Initiative, which is the reserve fund for any country can draw when you're facing the crisis. The only thing that not only in the paper that you are talking about to become one single market, but you have to shape your mindset as well. Because your mindset has to be one. Because each country cannot compete individually in the global market. But if you are packing together, then you become one. You'll be able to compete, and you will build the competitiveness in this region as a whole. And each country, you don't have to produce the same product.
Your question just reminds me of one old African proverb, which said that if one want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you need to go all together. That is actually what we are doing. Today is, for example, the cooperation between among the ASEAN national oil companies. We are investing even outside ASEAN. We together with Petronas, we are joining investing in Vietnam. We together with Vietnam, we are doing exploration in Africa, for example, successfully. These are kinds of examples that I can list hundreds of it that doing alone is not, probably we will not be able to come this far. But doing together, and that we are going to do together more once we become single market, we will create a really pushing, helping hand that will propel ASEAN forward more, even faster than what we have experienced in the last 10 years.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Let me ask if there's anything any of you would like to add. We have about a minute to go.
Just thank you for inviting me to this forum. I'm not from Wharton, but I'm from Williams.
Well, let me thank each of the panelists, and please join me in thanking the panelists for